Aphoristic appendage to On Truthtelling. 251 to 300. 251. Take a look at Animal Farm. When the will to setting up an ideal society is wedded to the will to power, chances are the main leaders and organizers, however intelligent they may be or benevolent they seem, will turn out to be, and this is the least that can be said, so many wolves in sheep's clothing, or, to state things closer to how they are in the novel, so many pigs who believe that all animals are equal but some more equal than others. 252. Any group or class, no matter what their moral and political convictions, ends up being corrupted by power, the desire for gain being, like gravity, a universal principle. 253. Now tell me about the brave new world that's coming. 254. From Newton to Einstein, gravity goes from being an attraction between bodies in space to being space that, along with time, is curved by bodies. In other words, it goes from being a mystery that most people understand to one that, physicists and mathematicians exempted, hardly anyone does. 255. When one hears the language of war nowadays, one realizes that the same mentality exists today as existed 5,000 years ago. Peoples and countries that pride themselves on their good graces are, in the face of some external threat, willing to unleash unmitigated horror. 256. It would be fair to say that an empire is showing signs of decline when what it expects from itself as model society and what it expects from itself as imperial force grow disparate to the point of absurdity. 257. For the birth of an aphorism, one is always counting on a state of mind that, at odd unaccountable moments, has the purity of a prism. Most of the time, it's quite the opposite, either cloudy and confused or else self-absorbed and fatuous. 258. If every person were a model of good behavior, the world would no doubt be far safer. The question is, however, how much do we desire safety over other things? Would a certain moral, political, and cultural homogeneity, one resulting from everyone being right thinking and right acting, be tolerable? Could the world ever become a single community? How inhuman and despicable it seems to rule out such a possibility. Rather, it seems that the best in all of us wants to keep this dream alive, even if it leads us in its own way to the apocalypse. 259. You see what the problem is, all you intellectuals who claim to know and occupy the moral high ground. If you can't give priority to the hardship and death that your own country is responsible for, then all your other attempts at being authoritative on issues of right and wrong, however well argued they may be, are permanently open to being challenged and dismissed. 260. Once one is a public figure, especially one who is greatly admired and respected, it becomes very difficult to talk on all issues with the same level of openness and honesty. The reason for this is, apart from the difficulty of admitting ignorance in some area or other, one has to deal with an idealized image of oneself that doesn't easily withstand contrary effects. 261. Here is man in all his glorious presumption when he invents theories about the beginning and end of stars and the universe, but no theory about the beginning and end of theories. 262. You will find enough people who say they're for world peace, but few who'd be willing to give up some of their luxuries or take a significant drop in their standard of living for it. 263. Walt Whitman. So wholly optimistic about humankind. So all-encompassing. So democratic. So confident about the future. So creative with the past. So in love with the present. So American. 264. Love loves to flatter and to be flattered. Add to this all sorts of sensual pleasures and delights and one has that all too fleeting thing called romantic love. 265. When the consequences of going to war are far from certain, when the leaders don't really have the desire to get involved in a military confrontation, the frightening rhetoric that emanates from hostile nations is pure theater. In most instances, its worst outbreaks will be forgotten. On the other hand, there is always the chance that, due to unexpected circumstances, what was supposed to remain mere posturing or positioning on the world stage suddenly transforms into an implacable commitment to setting it on fire. 266. The ancient Egyptians must have had a burning desire to avoid old age as much as death. Not only did they die relatively young, but they also believed they would have a rejuvenated body in the afterlife. Further, their hieroglyphics only portray young people. Imagine this in a civilization that went through thousand-year periods of being young, middle-aged, and old. 267. What is comforting as an eternal prospect is the cyclical return and the straight line towards some new development or destination. 268. Generally speaking, a person who is preoccupied with right and wrong is attracted to the political sphere. When the preoccupation is with truth and falsehood, however, it's best to avoid it. 269. The ideal is not separate from the real but rather impressed upon it, resisting it as well as being resisted by it, dynamic tension, creative impulse, intermittent competition, and cooperation. Pathway to and palette of all emotions and sensibilities. Changing contour of a living landscape in every human head and heart. 270. The best defense is a good offense. Could anything be more descriptive of the rivalry between political opponents? 271. If everything that came from outside of us were taken into consideration, we could hardly be judged to be more responsible for the best that we do than the worst. But of course, this judgment itself isn't possible from a practical standpoint, moral, legal, political, social, cultural, or otherwise. 272. Sex, the subject so out in the open and yet so confined and concealed. So common in practice, but certainly not so common as the talk or the thought of it, and yet so private and obscure. Gateway to pleasure and also to shame. Thorn in the side of many whose sexual life can't match their fantasies or who find it a trial or betrayal of their higher purpose. Creator of people and yet seldom thought for this alone. Sublime and messy departure from the ordinary. Short-lived hell or long-lived nuisance. Married bliss or pornographic recourse and relief. 273. An aphorism shouldn't single out some people for blame while treating all others as innocent for at least one reason, which is that so much else, be it in speech or writing, is already devoted to this. 274. Nothing is more certain than, if some individual, group, class, institution, organization, or alliance wields great power, it will have much more moral authority than it otherwise would. However, such power can never be so great as to prevent either a swift or slow erosion of this authority because morality itself can never be monopolized and can always become a counterpower. 275. All human freedom is the product of an implacable fate whose rough way of measuring out things might be summed up as follows: all people are free, but some are freer than others. 276. A despicable commonplace is the practice of, when reporting on some contentious issue, putting one side in the best possible light while the other in the worst. 277. All arguments are suspect in relation to the degree in which they are partisan, polemical, and prone to giving top priority to winning, the fairness or accuracy principle being thereby undermined. 278. When it comes to violence, to the worst that human beings are capable of, to what even takes in slight acts of aggression, there is a double standard so immense, so long-lasting, so entrenched, so robust, so resistant to any treatment at the level of practical morality that, when all is said and done, it would take a second coming to get rid of it. 279. The moment of death is when the world stops circulating through us and we start circulating through it. 280. Most of us think from day to day, week to week, month to month, and year to year. Should it be any surprise when, in 5, 10, 20, 50, or 100 years, something happens that hardly anyone has thought of or planned for? 281. Being concerned with the true at the expense of the good could be viewed as being cold, uncaring, and even reprehensible. Being concerned with the good at the expense of the true, on the other hand, could be viewed as being flaccid, vulnerable, and wide open to corruption. 282. Walt Whitman managed to maintain his optimism even in the face of the horrors of the American Civil War. Seemingly all wounds resulting from this conflagration, as well as all those resulting from earlier ones, would be spiritually healed as the great new democracy spread its influence everywhere and made for the brotherhood of man. The positive, forward-looking, even prophetic attitude taken up by him throughout much of Leaves of Grass shows little sign of wanting or being able to extrapolate on the above-mentioned horrors to foresee the ones of the 20th century. In this regard, his optimism was a product of his times. Though by no means innocent, the America of the mid and late 19th century still seemed to have all the ideals and energy in place to right all wrongs. 283. A great nation in the throes of an identity crisis is the following: continuity versus discontinuity, reform versus revolution, the model society project versus the imperial one. 284. A. Burning issues of the day are falling stars destined to go out very quickly. B. Yes, in most cases that's true, but when one of them causes a conflagration, it's more like all the rest were bad omens. 285. What is proven humanly possible over and over is an ecstatic combination of moral certitude and extreme violence. 286. Even if the issue of not being objective for various reasons is put aside, a free press is really not so free as it makes itself out to be. After all, being a business, it has to report a fair amount of news every day, even when what's going on isn't much different from the day before. 287. What's hardly ever admitted, being such a sensitive area, is that virtually everyone is looking for a way to be on top. But this lust for power and superiority, which is present even in this aphorism, can play itself out in a multitude of ways and seemingly keep company with the angels as well as the devils. 288. While it's relatively easy to take up a radical or extreme position within some political movement, it's extremely difficult, on the other hand, to maintain an ambiguous or equivocal position when there's some highly charged moral consensus. 289. What makes morality so different from most subjects is that, although highly complex, everyone thinks they understand it. The reason for this is the assumption that, due to so much having already been rejected or refined in it, a sort of historical endpoint has been reached. It is largely assumed, in other words, that the times we live in and the culture we have are so advanced that our knowledge of good and evil has reached a culminating point and, minus a few finishing touches, can't change or go beyond what it is. 290. Cherry-picking is, according to the online dictionary, Wikipedia, the act of pointing to individual cases or data that seem to confirm a particular position, while ignoring a significant portion of related cases or data that may contradict that position. A good deal of the news we receive every day fits this definition perfectly. 291. Would it really be possible to live without disliking or hating anything? Yes, but only if every single moment of our life was filled with the opposite. But of course, this itself isn't possible, for even children have their ups and downs, so we end up having to be content with a sort of intermediate state. For many of the non-bliss-filled moments of our life, in other words, we rather like our dislike of things and even enjoy our hatred of them. 292. There are a number of people nowadays who talk about religion as if it were the worst thing that had ever happened to the world. This is a huge subject, of course, that allows for many paths of investigation. However, there is one thing that strikes the imagination of at least some of us not so quick to condemn age-old practices. Mindful of what can never be dismissed as a possibility, namely, an apocalyptic event, we wonder how many of these scoffers, if they were to see the end coming not only for themselves but for their loved ones and all they hold dear, wouldn't sink to their knees in a second and pray for some act of salvation well beyond reason or scientific explanation. 293. Walt Whitman's Song of Myself seems to be his response to the question, how can I justify myself and everything else at the highest possible level? With such an immense project in sight, it seems that he casts all spiritual or imaginative restraint to the wind to come up with a poetic vision exalting himself and everything else ad infinitum and without remainder. 294. Just as we have to wear a public mask on a multitude of occasions, so we have to remove it, or have it removed at least once in a while and in whatever way possible. After all, it does get dirty, not to mention sticky, underneath it. 295. If we listen to the talk or read the books of people who communicate at a high level and we appreciate and understand them, does not our mind become in some sense the same as theirs? 296. A. I had the thought the other day that people in olden times must have been better looking on average than they are today because they died younger. B. What a thing to say. A. I say it not with respect to wanting any change of policy in this area, but only in light of the common belief that everything we have today is so much better than it was yesterday. B. I don't know what to say. A. Well, it was just a thought. 297. It's seldom admitted that, while morality is undoubtedly caught up in history as specific foundational moments and avenues of progress and development, it's also implicated in radically and suddenly changing circumstances. It's not so predictable as is commonly assumed, in other words, and even contains a powerful X factor. 298. If only one could wake up every morning and, rain or shine, think, oh, this is like being on vacation. I wonder what we'll do today. 299. Of course, it's an illusion, but when you're young, it often seems you can't go wrong. 300. A. How many injustices have you committed? B. Too many to count. A. Big ones or small ones? B. Mostly small ones. A. To friends, family, or strangers. B. To all. A. Do you deserve to live? B. I've already been sentenced to death, just like you.